Thanks for joining this session. My name is Katie Taylor, and I'm one of the program officers who oversees the IES training programs. The other training program officers are also here today. We're gonna skip over intros just for the sake of time, but I would like each of them to say a quick hello, since maybe you haven't had a chance to meet them before. So Corinne Alfeld.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Meredith Larson.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you. Well, see your names.
And Katina Stapleton. Tina may not be in yet, so maybe I'll catch her on the back end. So for today's session, we have an excellent panel of former IES pre-doc or postdoc fellows from a variety of different fields and at different stages of their careers. So we have Sharday Bonilla, Joy Lesnick, Christy Moran, and Rachel Rosen. And today they are going to share their career paths and tips for transitioning from an IES fellowship. We'll start with a moderated discussion. And if you have questions during the discussion, feel free to put them in the chat. If it's directed to a particular panelist, please include their name. And we'll save some time on at the end for those questions. Also, as we're talking and if you have like your own tips or helpful resources that you'd like to share, feel free to also put those in the chat. That would be great. Meredith is going to keep an eye on the chat and pick out some good questions for us to talk about at the end. All right, so let's see. I think we're waiting for Rachel, but I think let's hop right into the first question. So I just wanted to start off with some intros. So could each of you just start by introducing yourself, describing your career path, and what led you to your current position? So let's start with Sharday.
Katie. Hi, everyone. My name is Sharday Bonilla. I'm an assistant professor in the College of Education at University of Massachusetts Amherst. I was a pre-doc fellow at Stanford in the Graduate School of Education, and I got my PhD in the economics of education. In terms of sort of what brought me to my current position, I was sort of ambivalent about whether I wanted to pursue academia versus sort of a variety of research roles. So I considered potentially working directly in a school district. Prior to my PhD, I was a fellow, a strategic data project fellow through Harvard in a school district, and I enjoyed that work, but wanted sort of more methodological rigor in terms of my training, which is why I pursued the PhD. And then I sort of learned about all of the different research shops and thought like, oh, maybe that would be sort of a place I'd want to end up. And so I wasn't sort of, I think, dead set on any particular pathway, which maybe is unusual, but I did feel sort of ambivalent as I was getting towards the end of my PhD career. And maybe part of that was because it's a slog and like you're tired at the end, and like sort of being dead set on any particular pathway, maybe it's just not in my nature. And it's probably protective too, right? Like sometimes you're scared, like, is someone going to want me? Are you going to make it? And so you sort of say like, oh, well, I don't really know what I want, or I'm not going to sort of be dead set in any particular way. That way I don't disappoint myself. So I will sort of be 100% transparent, and probably like, maybe there was a part of me that really did want to go into academia, but wasn't sure if academia wanted someone like me. And so I guess I want to normalize that sort of feeling that maybe sort of enters our thoughts more often than we perhaps want to admit out loud. And you sort of, in terms of, I'll just briefly close out and just say, like, I just wanted to do strong research. I wanted to sort of do rigorous research that really looked at what are we doing to help people achieve the goals that they set for themselves, and how do we set the conditions such that all kids have the possibility of saying, I want to do X, and that it actually is possible for them. And so I'm sort of all over the place in terms of what I'm interested in terms of research.
Thanks. I think that's so relatable. That definitely rings true for me. So that's helpful. Maybe Christy, can you share your response?
Sure. Well, I'm currently an assistant professor of special education at Lehigh University, and I just entered my third year, finished my third year review. And I think my path is a little bit unique because I am a first generation college student and never ever imagined I would be where I am now. I started college at a local community college that turned 4-year while I was there, that had about 1,200 students. And a series of different things kind of led me to research. And so I started off as a classroom teacher in Louisiana, where I was born and raised, and I taught both general education and special education. And when I got my special ed position, I was emergency certified in special education and had a number of students in my classroom who had some pretty significant interfering behaviors, particularly the children with autism in my classroom. And I really did not kind of feel prepared or know how to meet their needs. And during my master's program, I took a class on applied behavior analysis. And it was like an aha moment, like, this is great. Like, this can help the kids in my classroom. I want to learn more about it. And I was finishing up my master's degree. And so the next logical step was, well, I guess I'll get a PhD, with the thought process of, I'm just going to go learn a lot about autism, and I'm going to go learn a lot about ABA and go back to the classroom and be like the world's best teacher. I really didn't even know what research was at that point. And I applied on a whim to Texas A&M University because I researched and I saw that several faculty there had backgrounds in autism and were BCBAs, and that I could get my board certified behavior analyst certification while I was there. I actually overnighted my materials because it truly was applying on a whim, is the only place I applied to, and the deadline was the next day, and ended up getting accepted into the program with a full OSEP training fellowship that paid my entire way through my doctoral studies. And during my time there, I got the amazing opportunity to work with Doctors Jay Gans and Kimber Van Nest, and they were critical in kind of leading me towards a love of research. They were very patient, had a hands-on approach. They involved me in their own research and really helped foster my own interest in research. So much so that I ended up applying for a postdoc, which is 100% research. The IES fellowship I applied to was actually the only job I applied to. I didn't have a backup plan. I just wanted this job. And so thankfully I got it. Because when I was an intern at OSEP at the U.S. Department of Education, I received a news flash that said that Doctors Sam Odom, Brian Boyd, and Kara Hume had just received a training grant through IES for a postdoctoral training grant. And as soon as I saw that, I knew that they would be looking for IES fellows. And given my interest in autism and given how well they're known in the field of autism, I was like, that's where I want to be. I want to work with that group of researchers. And so I did. I ended up there, and thankfully they accepted me, and was there for 2 years, and now I'm an assistant professor.
Cool, thank you. So maybe Joy, let's go with you.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Christy, I love these stories so far. My gosh, like, pick what your next job is going to be, and like that's going to be it. Apparently, I love it. I am Deputy Chief of Research, Evaluation, and Academic Partnership at the School District of Philadelphia, where we have about 130,000 students in 215 schools. I was an IES postdoc. I started my career as a 4th grade teacher. And the child of teachers. I did end up teaching some special education students. I was not certified in that. After a couple of years of teaching, I thought that policymakers didn't know anything about teachers or kids. I was like 25 and out to change the world. And I decided I would get a PhD in education policy at Penn, at the Graduate School of Education there, and like be a policymaker who knows about teachers and about kids. And I think that there was not an IES pre-doc program there at the time, and the postdoc came afterwards. I did my IES postdoc at Vanderbilt University, and I was really interested in kind of like a much larger graduate school of education. Penn is fairly small with like 50 on the faculty, and Vanderbilt's like I don't know, 4 times as big or something as gigantic. And I was really interested in doing the postdoc and kind of figuring out how to balance teaching and research, because I really love teaching and I really love applied research. And I was kind of trying to figure out, where am I going from here? I was an elementary school teacher, so that's like a generalist with lots of interest. Charday, that's a good thing to have. It's interest in many things. And then from there, I went to the University of Chicago, to the Consortium on Chicago School Research, splitting my time there between there and Chapin Hall Center for Children. Really interested in how systems work together to support kids, and also got me really into some applied work with Chicago Public Schools through the consortium there. In Chicago, I worked with John Easton, who then ended up going to IES and be the director of IES. And also some of my Penn professors ended up going to IES at the time too. So I spent 5 years at IES as a program officer for the What Works Clearinghouse. I do remember in my interview, which I was not interested in taking. Many of these jobs I was not interested in taking and then ended up taking. So maybe it's the opposite of Christie's, I'm not sure. And I said, oh, the What Works Clearinghouse, terrible. I don't want that job. And then I ended up being the program office, and it is not terrible. It does many great things. I can talk about it now. While at IES, then I oversaw the REL program as the Associate Commissioner for Knowledge Utilization. And that's really where it's where I think has sent me to my current position after 5 years there, working on the clearinghouse and the regional educational labs. Moved back to my sort of like my roots in Philadelphia, and took a job at the school district, sort of thinking like, can we really make this research practitioner partnership thing work? Like, does this actually work? External researchers have been funding it at the government. I'm very interested in policy and systems level work. Like, can we do it at the school district? And the answer is yes, but it's like really, really hard to do. So I've been at the school district of Philadelphia for 5 years. I love it here. I love how it's sort of like very much research practice partnership within the district, as well as external researchers too. But there's just so many opportunities for using research in our sort of regular decision making that's happening all of the time. And so that's how I got to here. I don't think I've missed anything. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. And last but not least, Rachel, do you want to share your career path and introduce yourself and share your career path?
Sure. Hi, I'm Rachel Rosen. I'm a senior research associate at MDRC in the K-12 policy area, and I also co-direct a Center for Effective Career and Technical Education. I got my PhD in education policy and analysis at Teachers College, and I did my postdoc at the University of Michigan. How I got here is a little bit of a long and winding road. I was a late PhD bloomer. I didn't get my PhD until I was 40. So how I got here was I started out wanting to be a journalist, but I graduated college into a time when there were no journalism jobs that paid enough to eat and pay rent in the same month. And so after a few years of that, I decided I needed to do something else, but I realized, and I fell into a job as a research assistant at WestEd, which is a research firm in San Francisco, which has a REL contract, but I worked on a bunch of NSF projects, and I realized that some of the instincts for research were the same as what I liked about journalism, in that I wanted to ask big questions and dig into them in deep ways. And so that was sort of how I got interested in research. And I worked at WestEd on a variety of research projects for about 8 years before I decided to go to graduate school. And at first, I just went to get a master's degree because I was like, I'll get a master's degree, I'll get a promotion, I'll stay at WestEd for the rest of my life. And then I finished my master's degree, and I reached out to my colleagues at WestEd, and they were really like, yeah, if you want to really direct projects, like really just go get your PhD now, because you're not going to want to do it 5 years from now. Just do it. And so I was like, all right, I guess I'm doing this. And so that was how I ended up going to graduate school. And then when I did my postdoc at the University of Michigan, I kind of was on the fence about whether or not I wanted to go an academic route or whether I wanted to go back into the type of place I had come from, a research institution type of firm like WestEd. And after doing the postdoc, I really decided that academia was not for me. There were some, not any offense to any of the academics in the room, but I felt like I was looking for something that was more collaborative and team oriented. I didn't really care that much about having my name on papers. And I wanted to be somewhere where the research was communicated to a broader audience than just other researchers. And I just felt like I needed to be somewhere that was really collaborative and team oriented, and where I could work in teams with really smart people and find ways to communicate research to a broad policy audience. Because what I was really interested in was being part of the policy conversation. And so that was how I ended up at WestEd. Not at WestEd, MDRC, where I am now. It was really, I interviewed for a bunch of jobs, and it was my first choice job, and I was lucky enough to get it. So that's how I ended up here.
Awesome. I love how varied these career paths are. I think it's super, super interesting. So really quick, I just want to remind everybody to check the chat. Meredith posted a question a few chats ago, just to share what stage you are in your fellowship, and also what your research focus is. And also put questions there as well if you have them for our panelists. So the next question is what elements of your IES training prepared you, or like maybe, were particularly helpful in the job that you're doing now? And on the flip side, are there things that you weren't necessarily prepared for and wish you'd had more exposure to while in a fellowship? So let's mix things up this time. Let's start with Joy.
Sure. So I said that I wanted to do the postdoc to sort of try out the teaching and research. I think, and I, as other people were talking, maybe they've had this too. I had an executive coach say once that I've had a spiral career, which I think is a useful way. It's like around a central thing. It seems less disconnected as I've moved around a lot. But I appreciated what I did for the IES postdoctoral training was a more quantitative training, which definitely helped me along the way. I'm not sure that that academic training programs train you for being a research director in a school district, but maybe there's a lot about sort of like figuring out what your projects are and being flexible and adaptable. I think many jobs you're not prepared for in school anyway, other than to kind of like take a disciplined thinking approach to what problem needs to be solved and go ahead and do it. So I do think that the biggest benefit of my postdoc, which as I just got a private chat in the message, is the professional network that I built along the way there, and even in the connections I've made on this panel since we met each other a month ago. So really the professional networks have continued 15 years later.
Great, and I'm gonna ask you the next question too, just because I think these go hand in hand. What advice do you wish you'd gotten as an IES fellow about the training program?
Yeah, as I was thinking back, I mean, I think there's a lot of variety in how postdoctoral programs go. So it's a little bit hard to sort of like talk generally. For mine, sometimes I think it was great to be kind of a free agent paid by an external source and like kind of looking for your own projects. And that can also lead you to flailing about a bit. So it sort of depends. It's nice to know which you're more comfortable doing, having someone going onto a project right away, or sort of like having to shop yourself around. And on that same note, if you are shopping yourself around, I was told this, but I sort of underestimated it. 2 years is a very short period of professional time to kind of like shop yourself around and also get something going in order to then go back on the job market. So those are the things that I did know, but I thought about that again at the end.
Very helpful. Sharday, do you want to share your thoughts on those two questions as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of the things I felt well prepared for, I think certainly the networking, these were like pre-COVID times, but often it's hard for doctoral students, right, to get to conferences and be able to network. And that was something that I think was really helpful for me, being able to go as a first, second year PhD student and see see people present at conferences, look at sort of the breadth of research, right, in your particular institution, right? You sort of know what people are doing, and you have, often it can be pretty sort of insular. Often you're exposed to like a lot of the publications that the faculty at your institution are writing. That's what gets put on the syllabus, and maybe some of their friends, or, and so it sort of, I think, really was helpful for me in terms of broadening my perspective on sort of the wide array of research being conducted, meeting people from sort of many different institutions, and then just having opportunities to be in a professional space as a doc student, and then not have sort of that heightened, like, you have to present, or so for me, that was really helpful as a pre-doc, because it sort of showed me what's the next step, what's coming next. And I think sort of these different opportunities to engage with PIs or with other people who are sort of at that next stage, and be able to sort of witness that and be in conversation with those people, I thought was really helpful. In terms of what I didn't necessarily feel prepared for, like, I think that when I was sort of on the market, people were like, oh, you're an IES Fellows, you know everything about IES type thing. Like, as if I was some sort of like IES disciple, like, you know how to get IES grants, you know how to like do all these things. And I was like, I have no idea how to do these things. So I felt like there were a lot of sort of practicalities that I did not feel very comfortable with, that maybe people assumed that my IES training had provided, right? Like grant writing, like being an actual faculty member, like, like, how do you write a budget? How do you manage graduate students? How do you recruit graduate students? How are you, you often have the advising relationship that you experienced, but, do you sort of, you're experiencing it? Are you really sort of reflecting on like how you would want to be as an advisor or as a supervisor? And I think that those were things that, like, because you're in it trying to figure out what you need to do to get whatever research done, it can be sort of hard to be reflective. And so I wish I had been a little bit more reflective in terms of, just thinking about what might be the next step. Graduate school can often be sort of the here and now until you are on the job market.
Very helpful. So it sounds like your tip too is to take that time and be reflective about some of the experiences that you're having in that short amount of time. But Rachel, can you share?
Can you repeat for me the order of the questions again so I get them right?
Sure, and feel free to just not address them in order, but what elements of your training program like prepared you for the job that you're doing now? What maybe do you wish you were a little bit more prepared for? And then any advice you'd wish you'd gotten as an IES Fellow.
Thank you. So I think what my postdoc was really great for was, in my postdoc at the University of Michigan, most of it was working in collaboration with the Michigan Department of Education on putting together and using their state longitudinal data system for research. And it was really great at preparing me for understanding how to put together and use really large data sets like that, because I didn't have that experience as a graduate student, but also that learning how to navigate the relationships of working with people who are in policy and who are not necessarily researchers, and really understanding the importance of relationship management in putting together research with people whose sort of first idea is not research, and really understanding what's important to them about research, particularly if you're going to be using their data. And how to think about research questions in a way that is useful to people who can make decisions about policy. So I feel like it was really good training for that. I think, things that I didn't learn about that I've definitely had to learn about on the job are things like putting together a research budget, managing a research team, supervising junior staff. All of those things are things that I did not know, and are, there was, when I first got to MDRC, it was definitely an adjustment from academia to learn how to work within a budget, because in academia, you can just take whatever time you want to follow an idea as long as you want. And there's nobody saying, well, you can't spend, 130 hours on figuring out the answer to that question because you only have a certain number of hours that you can budget for. And so really figuring out how to focus in on the questions that are important and the amount of work I have to do to answer those questions rather than just digging into every single thing that seems interesting and useful and kind of narrowing it down that way. So I think kind of for a non-academic job, learning how to focus faster and better is something I think would have been useful for me. And I think, as somebody else said, particularly in a 2-year postdoc, I spent a lot of time at the beginning of my postdoc developing a paper that I didn't end up getting to do because there were data availability issues, and just I used up the time faster than I thought I would, and I didn't get to write that paper that I had started out thinking I was going to do in the postdoc. And so I think that was, somebody saw in the chat, somebody asked what would be the advice for doing a postdoc, and my advice would be to figure out one paper that you want to write in 2 years at the beginning before you start the postdoc. Figure out what the data availability is for that so that you can hit the ground running on day one and actually get it done, or at least to draft stage within your 2-year time frame.
Awesome, thank you. And then Christy.
Hi. Yes. So I actually felt very, very prepared for my current job as a result of my postdoc. I had some very specific goals in mind when I went in about why I wanted to do a postdoc. And so I really wanted to gain grant writing skills, gain experience with group design research, and gain experience with school-based research. And Kara Hume was my primary mentor. So I met with her regularly, and being a special educator, she was really great with having me write those goals down and then scale them into measurable objectives. And so let's check in every time we have our check-in meetings. Where are you in meeting these goals? And so I found that was a very effective way to kind of keep me on track and making sure that how I was spending time was helping me to get closer and closer to achieving my goals. And as a result of that experience, just as a testament to how helpful the fellowship was to me, the reason the IES grant that I'm PI for, that I'm here now for, is an early career grant that I was able to win in my first year. And it focuses on school-based research, and it focuses on group design research. And so I have no doubt that my success with that grant is directly tied to all of the mentorship and the experience that I received during my postdoc. The advice that I wish I would have gotten as a postdoc fellow is actually advice I did get as a postdoc fellow, but maybe a little bit later. And so kind of wish that I would have received it a little bit earlier. And I'm going to talk a lot about Kara. I see her here because I have so much respect for her, and she played such an important and vital role in my development as a researcher during my postdoc. But when I first started my postdoc, I was focused a lot on publishing my own data for my dissertation. I had a ton of data. I still have a ton of data from my dissertation, 5 years later. And so I focused most of my time on trying to write those manuscripts up and get them out. And she noticed that, and she gave me the really great suggestion of, you know what, you're here. We have a lot of data. We have some great people that you can collaborate with and do co-authors with. You can always do your dissertation data later. Let's take advantage of the data sets that we have here and now and publish those and get those out. And so I did. And so that way now I have a record of on my CV of publications using data sets from the grants during my postdoc and with the colleagues that I worked with during my postdocs. But I wish I would have maybe thought about that a little bit sooner and kind of went in with that mindset, because then I could have gotten even more publications out, and I could have, done even more great work in that area. Because if you decide to go as an assistant professor, you're going to have a lot of time then to get your own work out. And so my advice is to save it. And that way, when you're an assistant professor and you're busy trying to get an IRB written and form new collaborations with new partners because you're in a new area, you can still be publishing that data that you brought with you, and be productive along the way.
That's some great advice. Thank you all. So I'm gonna move to the last question, and I feel like this is probably the one that is at the top of current fellows' minds. But I also am going to ask you to be somewhat brief so that we can leave time for questions. So what were the things that were particularly helpful, or maybe not so helpful in your job searches and your interviews, negotiating job offers? If there's like maybe some top tips or things to avoid that you could share, that would be awesome. So let's start with Rachel.
Yeah, so I would say that the top thing for me in looking for a job was realizing what kind of life I wanted to have and not just the intellectual work that I wanted to do. So I had an experience when I was on the job market where I was, and this was in pre-COVID times and everything was done in person, where I was 8.5 months pregnant and I was called to a fly out for a job. And I went, even though probably I should not have even been on an airplane at that point. I was hugely uncomfortable through the interview. It was about 98,000 degrees outside and I was giantly pregnant and sweating and tired and emotional and a whole bunch of things. And I didn't get the job. And I think it was a job that I had wanted, and it was actually a job that had been offered to me when I first finished my PhD, and I turned it down to do the postdoc. And then they had said to me, when you finish the postdoc, come back to us because we really like you. So it wasn't like they didn't know me, but on the second round, I was sort of in this state of being giantly pregnant and emotional. And I didn't get the job, and I was very upset about it at the time, but I realized later that I was really glad I didn't get that job because I didn't want to be at a place that would be so unsympathetic to one. I told them before I went to the flyout that I was 8.5 months pregnant and they asked me to come anyway. And they were pretty unsympathetic to the state that I was in during, standing up for 7-hour, rounds of interviews, all of it. But I realized I didn't want to be at a place that would ask me to do that or to participate in an interview in that state and be so unsympathetic about it and then not offer me the job because I didn't perform well, even though they knew me because I was hugely pregnant. And so I say that, I tell you this because my advice is to really think about the kind of environment you want to be in, the kind of people you want to work with, and the kind of community you want to have around you for the rest of your life. And it's more than work-life balance. It's about having a whole life where you can do things like raise your child and be in community with other people, both in your job and outside of your job. And it's not just about your sort of intellectual achievements or your intellectual desires, but you're making a decision for your whole life. And so I would say to pay attention to that and pay attention to what you need for yourself to be happy and fulfilled, both in your job and outside of your job.
That's awesome advice. So maybe let's go Sharday and then Christy and Joy.
So I would give some advice. Some people ask sort of like, how would you list your IES sort of fellowship? I would recommend sort of listing it as being a fellowship recipient and putting the dollar amount that that your fellowship is worth, whether it's your salary for those 2 years, and sort of list it as like, look, this is like a first big grant that I've received because IES has invested in you and you want it. And so put it out there and say, look, I got this. I think I did that for my pre-doc fellowship. And I would recommend for all the different things that you get, putting the amount. I think I even got a travel grant that was like $500 and I put that there too. We put ourselves out so much in academia and, these things are they are signals to other people that you are putting yourself out there consistently, and that you're going to sort of, it's a signal that you'll keep doing that. So I would certainly put that there prominently, and consider whether it needs to sort of be in a fellowship or like where in your CV to make sure it's like on that first page, because not everyone has one, right? And so I would put that. And in terms of like, some people are asking like, how many jobs did you apply for? Like, when I decided to go on the academic market, I got the advice from a very successful academic, like go big or go home. If you're willing to get on a plane and fly there and give a talk, then apply. You don't necessarily have to be willing to take the job, but if you're willing to go, don't close doors for yourself, right? And so that really helped me. I was like, well, I would go to Montana and give a job talk. Like, I would do that. I would, like, I don't understand why, like, there were very few places that I wasn't willing to get on a plane and fly to and network. And so I would just sort of, I know, at least in my program, I don't know, maybe it was just at Stanford, people were very much like, only the coasts, only here, only there. And like, I think you end up closing doors for yourself by doing that. And when you're on the market, these are opportunities to network and for people to get to know about you, people who might be letter writers when you're on the tenure track in the future, people who might be on panels reviewing grant applications. So I think I would just sort of view the job market as this opportunity to network and to put your name out there. And then be prepared for all the rejections that are going to come, because it's a lot of rejection and it's emotional. And you're, especially if you're doing a postdoc, you kind of have to go on the market up again. And I would just encourage you to go big and take that time. Like, rejection is hard, and you should give yourself some grace for that and do the things that you need to do to take care of yourself. It's really challenging, and my partner is really great because they supported me through all of that. I would also really think about using other IES fellows and like the networks that you're creating here to do practice job talks, particularly with people who are not in your field. Often you'll maybe do a postdoc or you'll train somewhere, and there are a lot of people doing what you're interested in. That's why you ended up there. But when you go out on the job market, there are not as many people doing what you're interested in doing. And so learning how to talk to people who are adjacent to your field, outside your field, is really important. And so drawing on sort of any networks that you have with people who are smart, intelligent, who can look at your slides, somebody who's willing to, can you exchange slides with another IES fellow and give feedback? Can you present on Zoom? Can you practice? Because I think the most important thing on the job market is, frankly, it's your job talk, right? That's what everyone is sort of there. They assess your ability to teach based on how you present your own research, which I don't know if it's the best indicator of your teaching ability, but I think that's often what happens. And it's where you get to sort of showcase sort of your research. And so I think it's the most important thing to prepare for. And then I would also say, as you're sort of going on job interviews, know that it's a two-way street, and don't be afraid to ask questions of people at the institution and interview them too. And I think that can sort of help empower you to sort of say I'm a person and I'm choosing, right? Like Rachel was talking about, like, you should as much be assessing them. And I think that we get in this place of being like, oh, I hope they pick me. I hope they pick me. And I think that's okay to feel that way, but also to know that like you have agency and choice, and ask the same question of a bunch of people and see what the sort of answers are sort of in response. So anyway, I will stop. But also feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to connect with people too.
Thank you. And thanks for addressing some of the questions that have come up in the chat too. Christy and then Joy, do you want to share?
I think probably my first piece of advice kind of aligns with one of the questions that came up in the chat is when do you start applying to jobs? And if you have a 2-year fellowship like I did, my advice is to wait till your second year, because it can be very like Sade was saying, it can be very fear-inducing when you think, well, the second year, that's my last year. If I don't get a job, then what am I going to do? You know, and you get kind of worried about, am I going to find a job? And so that kind of fear-based thinking sometimes pressures people to want to start applying to jobs in year one. And personally, I don't think that's really helpful because, as many people have mentioned, 2 years is really short, and looking for jobs is a full-time job in and of itself. And so you really should be taking advantage of that year one to gain the skills that you went into the postdoc to get, and to publish and to make collaborations with people. And you'll have plenty of time in year two to start that job search process. And I would also say that a lot of that fear is probably unfounded. I mean, you are IES Fellows. There are very few people in this country that can claim that title. And so just by having that, you get moved up to a lot of people's search list, and you're really well qualified. So rest in that knowledge of knowing that, you know what, I am good enough. I can do this. I will get a job. And not only will I get a job, I'll probably get multiple job offers. And then you get your pick of where you want to be. So that's my number one piece of advice. My second piece of advice doesn't seem to align with other people, so I'm not going to give it. Joy seems to have I really like, Joy, your discussion of how you applied to places that you didn't think you wanted to be at, and then like it ended up being a really great experience. So I guess apply to different places, even if you might not think you're gonna be there. I kind of took the opposite approach, and I only applied to places that I was like really wanted to be. And the way I determined whether I really wanted to be there was, before I even applied, I would look at all of the CVs, because I knew I wanted to be a faculty member. And so that kind of part was a little bit easier. So I would look at all of the CVs of everyone in the department to try to determine, you know, how frequently are faculty publishing? How frequently are they successfully winning federal grants and federal funding? Because knowing those things would help me to know, am I going to have mentors there? Am I going to have people there that can kind of support my continued growth as a researcher? Without looking at something and making judgments and saying, oh, that's an R1 university, of course they're going to be publishing frequently there, or that's an R2 university, of course they're not going to be publishing frequently there, which is actually not the case. I interviewed, sorry, apparently I forgot to turn that down. There we go. That should take care of it. I interviewed at several places that were R1 universities that had like 3 teaching loads and very low expectations for research. And I'm currently at Lehigh, which is an R2, and I teach a 1-1 course load with the majority of my time spent on research and with pretty rigorous expectations. And so looking at people's CVs in advance will give you a much better idea of the culture of the university than you could just by reading about the university itself.
We all have different paths, Christy. That one worked for you. So that's why we all have different perspectives on this. And now I'm glad I get to go last, because now I know what my role is on this panel. It is to tell you that if you are not interested in an academic job, that is okay. And if you don't want to go that route, that is great. If you want to go to a research firm, great. Let's start off with Rachel. That's great. There's very meaningful work there. And if you want to go somewhere like a school district, we need really good people in school districts. And it is not, it is very prestigious to do so. I don't think that my advisor, who's on the call right now, as I saw later, would say that it's a good thing that I'm here. I have 6 PhDs on my staff, and they all work 8:30 to 4:30, Monday to Friday. So there's also that. And I think, you know, the applied research for me, working in, if you're interested in sort of an applied setting, like being in a school district, let me know. I'm also hiring right now. And so I think there's plenty of opportunities. Like, to me, what's super exciting about doing research in the school district is, one, all the access to the data that you want, so much. All the access to collecting qualitative data that you want too, so much. You can also do lunch duty, like some of my staff are doing right now, because we have school staffing shortages, you know, other duties as assigned at the moment. So that's challenging. But there are lots of opportunities to bring research, whether it's our own or connections to all of your research, to bear when people make important decisions. And they are making decisions every day And we are able to like insert research and evidence all the time. And to me, that's what excites me about my job. My advice is not for the academic job market, which I did go on, but did not go that route. And it's about, and as a hiring manager now, my career experience is much more in like big bureaucracy, like the federal government, and big bureaucracy, like a big urban school district. And that is to, to know that there's often, and I think this happens in universities too, so the rest of you can correct me, but there's often things going on behind the scenes that are entirely unrelated to your application or your skills. And so if that helps with the rejection, like many times you are like a perfect fit and your interview goes absolutely fantastic. And you're like, how did they not pick me? And it's because something else is going on and the faculty are fighting about something and something else is happening. It's unrelated to you. And that happens in bureaucracies too. And that happens, I think, everywhere. Everyone's nodding. I think the other thing is that if you don't, if at least where I work, I often tell people to apply for jobs that they are overqualified for, because you do not know what kinds of things are happening behind the scenes to change jobs. I often swap out jobs for people who apply for my entry-level jobs who are way overqualified. And then I make a new position like senior statistician. I just did it to try to like hire that person who's a good fit for the role. And also things that you're underqualified for too. So at least in settings like this, I think if it's a good match and it's a place you want to be and it's a place they want you, they might be able to make some things happen. And maybe that's the case other places as well. So yeah, happy to answer more questions about that if helpful.
Thank you all so much. That's super helpful. And I've seen some questions come in the chat. I think some you've addressed, but Meredith has been keeping an eye on this. So Meredith, do you want to kind of?
Sure. And we've got some really great questions and we're running a little short on time. So, I might just ask for like 2 comments, so if a couple of you can respond to them just so that we can at least hit them. And then if we have additional time, we'll come back to some of the questions. And also just to put it out there for all of the fellows and any of the training directors, like the program officers have seen dozens, if not hundreds of different paths that people have taken. Like we've seen everything. We've seen the good, the bad, the like crazy. Ask us, like if you think that you're the first one that's ever experienced something, generally that's not true. And we might have some ideas and be able to connect you to people who have taken alternate paths or had similar experiences. So remember that we're here for you. Okay, so indeed, many, or at least some of the questions were naturally addressed. So I'm just going to start off with a couple, and then panel, if you want to either physically raise your hand if you have something, or you can virtually raise your hand and just unmute yourself and maybe give like 1 or 2 comments on a particular topic. So something that came up a couple times was any advice about how to maximize your fellowship during COVID when you can't necessarily go to conferences and things on those lines. So does anybody have any ideas? I see nodding, but everybody's.
I think this is so hard because we've never done it before. Oh, sorry, Sade has a. I was just going to explain how like we have a quarantine school basically. And I was talking to the principal and I was like, didn't you learn this in quarantine school graduate program? And she's like, right, exactly. Go ahead. Sade maybe has a real suggestion.
I bet because many of you are closer to sort of your grad school experience, the professional associations that you're affiliated with are often really great places to start for networking. And they're often sort of mentoring groups or affinity groups and things that are sort of linked there. And so putting yourself into sort of communication with established organizations and networking there. And I feel like, always putting yourself out there is really important. I think during COVID, even more so, sort of increasing your visibility and sort of be willing to take that time to sort of show up. I don't think that virtual happy hours are necessarily anyone's favorite thing to do. But I think that as you're sort of nearing the job market, you do have to kind of push yourself to do icky things that wouldn't feel the best. And that's because people end up sort of being like Joy, right? Like you're here and now you know that Joy is hiring at School District Philadelphia, right? And if you hadn't showed up, you wouldn't have known. And I feel like that's always what happens. So I would just say you really do have to put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to cold email people. Email Joy afterwards and say, thanks so much I saw you on the panel and I'm applying, right? Or like, or connect a friend, like I feel like we often think people aren't going to respond or we're bothering people. And I think that we have to sort of say like, no, everyone wants to help people because everyone needed help at some point in their career.
Okay, and to kind of pick up on this thread, and I see that we have some people raising their hands in the participant, so we'll hopefully get to that too. But sort of thinking about using social media. So there was a question or sort of a comment about using LinkedIn, and if anybody has that, I just want to broaden it. If anybody has an example of what they've done within social media, whether that's LinkedIn, Twitter, to help sort of connect or build a network. So have any of you used that? And if so, can you give an example of what you did? Nobody uses social.
I don't know that I've used it to connect and build relationships as much. I mean, I'm in a few like Facebook groups, like CEC, Council for Exceptional Children. Like there's a few subgroups that I'm in for teacher educators. One thing I did do though, when I was on the job market, is I would Google myself and I would see what's out there, because you can guarantee that the people are going to be Googling you and you want to have control over that as much as possible. And so, for example, with my Facebook page, I went through and I did view as, and like any of my likes or anything, if I liked a song or a book that I didn't think other people would like me liking, I would unlike it so it wouldn't show up. Or I would purposely, like if I posted something about a paper I published or about some accomplishment that I received during my postdoc, I would make those posts public. So they would come up and other people would be able to see them, but not be able to see my private posts that only are there for my friends. And I did updates. The only time I've ever updated my LinkedIn profile was when I was on the job market. It's very out of date now, but I would go through in any way possible. I could highlight my accomplishments through social media or through like being searched through a Google engine. I would, because I knew that people were going to be doing that and I wanted them to see me in a positive light.
Thank you. Okay, a couple more questions, and that might be all that we have time for. So one question was if anybody had any advice for what programs can do, whether they're federally funded or private foundation funded, to help make the experience better for incoming fellows. And I'd like, so if you have thoughts about that, or just in general, what could programs be doing from the get-go to really help an incoming fellow? Any advice? Or what should they not do, if that makes it easier? It's the awkward silence.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if I have anything to add over what we've already talked about. Maybe spending a lot of time in reflection, because maybe you thought you wanted to, go into academia, into a faculty position, but now talking to other people, you're realizing that there are other jobs out there. And so maybe spending some time looking at places like USA Jobs or local school district or state district job offerings, and just kind of looking and seeing what else is out there.
Joy, go ahead, Joy.
Yeah, it sounds like what was successful for Christy, and I think it was helpful for me too, was having a clear goal. Like, what am I trying to accomplish while I'm here? I was trying to figure out if I wanted to go the academic route, and she was trying to get, a particular, and her advisor was so clear on like, what are your goals? Let's get them done. So maybe it's, sort of being really clear about what is the point of this. If it's like, I don't really know where I'm headed, let's keep all the doors open. That's a goal too. So maybe if you are clear about the purpose of why you're doing it.
Yeah, I would say that the thing I think that maybe programs, and probably both pre-doc and post-doc, could maybe do better, or that IES could help them with, is to support those programs in helping students and postdocs learn more about non-academic careers, because I know that I felt like as a graduate student, I felt like there was a lot of pressure to go the academic route, and that my advisors really didn't know anything about the non-academic route, and they sort of talked about it like it was inferior to the academic route, that you weren't, really, I don't know, that there was something less than about going the non-academic route. And so I know that in my position now, people do, and this is something also you can do on the job market, is that like random graduate students reach out to me all the time and ask me for advice about, they say, I'm interested in career technical education. I'm interested in not going the academic route. Would you be willing to take a half hour to talk to me? And I think that's great. I think also like lobby your universities to put together panels of people coming to do job talks like this one that are non-academic. It is sometimes I can't take all of the context that I get because I can't do, a half-hour conversation with every single graduate student who's on the market at the time. So I just think some coordinated support for helping people really explore what all of their options are is something that programs could do better.
Thank you. Okay, so the last round, maybe in one sentence, if you can tell us what has been the biggest benefit to you from your training program. So one thing that you carry with you that seems particularly beneficial. And let's do this maybe in alphabetical order. So let's see if I got my alphabet by last name. So we'll start with Sade, then Joy, then Christy, and then Rachel.
There's the community that the IES program gives you. Often you will your next job may not have a community that large, particularly in academia. You'll feel a little more solitary. And so I would say that.
I'd agree. Most definitely the people and the broadening of my perspective as a result of my postdoc.
Sorry, that's me. I don't know that I can narrow it down to one, but probably two would be the relationships and that I was able to form with my mentors on the postdoc, who still mentor me even today. And I, have been a faculty member for this, I'm in my third year. Those lifelong connections with them are crucial. And then also just all the knowledge and skills that I gained from them that are really kind of helping me now at this stage in my career.
I would also say the relationships both with faculty and, non-faculty that I worked with in my postdoc, but also I was in a postdoc where there were several IES postdocs at the same time. And I've continued to maintain relationships with those of us who were sort of postdocs and postdoc alumni together. And those have been valuable professional relationships for me. And so I would say the network as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think that is our time. I just want to say thank you so much to this panel and all of the helpful things you shared, all of the helpful tips. And for those of you listening in, just for the IES Fellows, just FYI, we will be sharing like a newsletter with some resources in the next month or so. And thank you all for joining today. And please rate the session when you get back to the agenda page. If you click on this session, then you can rate it and provide additional feedback.
I was going to say really quickly too, I can't speak for everyone else, but I know I'm happy to share job search materials or anything else. If you have questions, feel free to reach out and happy to help in any way.